everyone. Thank you so much for coming. We're actually just waiting on one more guest speaker to come, but in the meantime, we will now begin the Global Issues Forum. So hi, I'm Cici Zhou, and welcome to the first ever QAHS Global Issues Forum. Our theme for this forum is Closing the Gap, where we will discuss the discrimination and inequality that we see around the world and in our home of Australia. From this forum, we hope that students and members of the QAHS community will be able to walk away with better understanding of the issues, and most importantly, they will know the feasible steps that each and every one of us can take to help the global and local community in solving these issues. First, I would like to pass it on to Paula to do an acknowledgement of the country.
Jingri Jingla, Yangingari Paula, Nyayo, Gangalira, Noli, Nirikomandala, Javin, the Yugomanga, Nalegi, Mulala, Javin, Nalegi, Mulala, Najangali, Moyuyon, Na Junabai Nubani, Nalegi, Mulala, Garonika Jubayan. In Yugambeh, I said, hi, I'm Paula. I'd like to acknowledge with all that I am that today we gather on the land of the Yugambeh language region. I give my respect and acknowledge country. I give my respect and acknowledge elders, their wise words and their families. And I give my respect and acknowledge each of you here today. Coming together, we can learn from each other, where we share, and in our personal growth, make change positive for the rest of our community. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paula. So today I am joined by Dr. Dinesh OAM, who will be here shortly. He is an emergency doctor and disability advocate. Paula Niho, Advanced Health Promotion Officer from the Gold Coast Public Health Unit, and Mrs. Rachel Hart, QAHS teaching staff and former elite athlete. Please join me in welcoming them on the panel. Okay, so we'll just get started with our very first question today. An anonymous asker said, I am an Australian citizen. I was born and grew up in Australia. However, I still get discriminated against because of my Chinese heritage. My father is a doctor, and a patient walked out on him because he didn't want a Chinese doctor. Australia is a proud multicultural nation, yet there is still discrimination against people of recent immigrant background and minorities. In your personal experience, what have your experiences been with discrimination against immigrants, especially in the workforce? Mrs. Hart will go over this one to you first.
Not sure I knew I was going first. Welcome everyone, thank you for coming this morning. Look, I'm not going to do anything other than talk about my own experiences, and none of my opinions or experiences are your lived experiences or your opinions, so anything that I say is not something I'm asking you or telling you or advocating that you have to do this. That's not what's happening today. We're talking, and it's an open and honest discussion about things that we've witnessed and seen, and how the most important thing is things that we can do to move forward and to be an ally or an advocate in our own lives and start to bring about systemic change. Now, as a white British woman of middle class, I have very little experience personally with racial discrimination. That's fair. However, I have seen the effects that it can cause on people, and being a teacher, there's an element of having to work towards what we can do as a community at our school, and what we can do as important individuals in a local community, and then what we can do nationally and internationally. You might think as one human there's not an awful lot you can do, and sometimes when we look at these issues they seem so huge that we do nothing, and that's completely understandable. But small systemic change comes from the individual, and then it comes from higher up, and it's a top-down approach. In terms of things that you see in here, so as an educator, I worked in a number of schools across 3 different countries, and I've seen stop being what we call a passive bystander. So if you hear something, and I want to make it very clear that often discrimination does not come from a place of hatred or a place of I hate that person because of X, Y, and Z. That's often not what happens. There's often an unconscious bias that occurs based on the learnings that we have from others, or the learnings that we have from whatever it may be, sport or television, movies, whatever that may happen, wherever the learning may occur, an unconscious bias happens. And one of the things we can do is just look at it when you hear something, is challenge that. And be encouraged that when others may or may not challenge you. So if you hear something, I really encourage you to say, hang on, I'm not sure that's okay. Can I tell you why I feel like that makes me feel uncomfortable? And when we all start to agree that that's what's going to happen, the change comes about very quickly. That's only for me personally as an educator. Sorry, I can see that.
Thank you so much. We'll just first invite Dinesh onto the stage. Thank you very much for joining us, Dinesh.
Hi everyone. Just had to make an entrance.
Thank you. So I'll just pass this question on to Dinesh now. Just sorry to thrust you straight into it. But the question was, what, in your personal experiences, what have your experiences been with discrimination against immigrants, especially in the workforce? Now this might especially be true you, Dinesh, as your family came from Sri Lanka, and also with a disability, there's an extra weight added onto, especially in the workforce. So could you tell us a bit more about your personal experiences?
Yeah. So I've got a few lenses that I can talk about this through. One is my own experience of coming into Australia from Sri Lanka when I was 10 years old with my parents. And I had an interesting insight into it recently, because I think the environment that you are in when you're a person of diversity matters. So when we moved to Australia, the first place that we lived in was Sydney, very briefly, for a couple of months, and then we went to Byron Bay. And that's where I spent most of my childhood. So I caught up with a friend recently that I went to school with, and he told me that he was of the First Nations people. And I never knew that until now, which is about 20, 25 years later. And then we talked about how I didn't know that then. And then we talked about how when we were growing up, Byron Bay had a mix of all sorts of people. Had people of different ethnicities, had migrants, and had wealthy people, incredibly wealthy people, poor people, people that were struggling, all sorts. But we all just got along, and no one really knew what background they're from, how much money they had, whatever else. But we all just spent time together, and we all got along. So I think that culture really matters. But elsewhere in the country, so currently I work as a senior advisor to the Disability Royal Commission, and we are looking at culturally and linguistically diverse groups. So it's I guess a minority within a minority, in a sense. And when we look at it through these lenses, we see that regions do matter, because Western Sydney, for example, has been under the microscope a lot with COVID. And the people in that region, particularly from ethnic minorities, are experiencing COVID differently. Vaccinations, policing, all sorts of things. So we know that people have different experiences. So it depends on where they are, it depends on the groups that they're surrounded with, and it depends on a whole host of things. But I can say that due to the trajectory I took, I've never really experienced racism or issues because I'm a migrant. but I know that these things exist, and I know that other people experience it all the time. So it is still pervasive within our society. I had colleagues last year that were experiencing these things through the pandemic, particularly if they were of Asian heritage. In the hospital, sadly, we had various comments happen in the change room sometimes, and we had to really clamp down on a lot of this bad behaviour. So it is there, but I think it's a cultural thing, and I think change comes from the grassroots, and it's up to each and every one of us to make sure that we embrace each other and welcome each other and treat each other like friends, regardless of where we're from.
Yeah, thank you very much, Nish. I wanted to touch on something that you said about how everyone's experiencing COVID differently, and this question I think Paula should start with first. And it's that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples are prioritised in the current vaccine rollout, but yet the percentage of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples that are vaccinated continue to be low. Why do you think that is the case?
So it's interesting in health we talk of a deficit narrative. So you're telling me that as an Aboriginal person I'm less likely to be vaccinated, which if you look at the data, of course, across Australia, yeah, it can be 50% lower. But if I told you on the Gold Coast 93% of our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander elders, 60 years and over, have had their first dose. Over 85% are fully vaccinated. That's a strengths-based story. Of course, when we look at 12 to 59 years, that's lower. We're down about 16% for our first dose. But in the way that we tell the narrative, in the way that the media portrays the narrative, you can either assist, encourage someone to take a pathway, or you can actually hinder that. So if you're telling me I'm sad, bad and mad, what am I going to do? Well, I'm just sad, bad and mad. That's what the news says. Why would I bother? So sometimes it's in what we say and what we communicate. Of course, that's not true of all of Australia. Some areas, access to vaccines has been really hard, and we've noticed with communities where COVID has been experienced that the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities in those areas are being vaccinated at a high rate once it's accessible, once it's seen as something that's relevant. We've also communicated very strongly that COVID was a disease that affected our old people, so our community sees success. We've got our old people vaccinated. What we haven't done well is talk about the Delta variant and how that affects entire families and spreads so much. So there's a range of what we call a hesitancy spectrum in regards to vaccination. Everyone has this hesitancy spectrum. It doesn't matter what community or sub-community you come from. I did some focus groups with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community on the Gold Coast in May this year, and the vaccine hesitancy spectrum was from our elders stepping up saying we're going to get vaccinated as soon as possible, as soon as we can, which when the government rolled out phase 1A, 1B and so on, then people that didn't fit in those phases were seen as, well, we're okay, we're not going to be affected by this because we're not priority. And so little by little things have changed and the messaging hasn't kept up. There's been overload of messaging. People can't discern what's true, what's not true, and so we build up these hesitancies. So I think it's little by little addressing those. I did find it interesting. I had a friend come to the Gold Coast, a famous didgeridoo artist, and he said to me, "Hey Paula, can you get Mum and I vaccinated? We've had our first dose, we had that in Townsville." And I said, "Oh, yeah, of course we can get you a second dose, no worries." And organise that. And I said, "Tim, why didn't you get your vaccine in Brisbane, eh?" He said, "I don't have a doctor. I don't have a Medicare card. I don't get undone." So we target a lot of our health messaging through our medical professionals. Do you each have your own doctor? Do you have your Medicare card yet? Do you know that all your details are correct? Haven't moved and forgotten to update those things? You know, these things are real for all of us. And then we add these pressures onto other communities and think that it should be the same. And it's same but different. And so I think sometimes I'm looking at ways of communicating with our younger people who don't have Medicare cards, who don't go to the doctor, to be able to communicate and say, hey, this is the risk, this is, you know, the reward, I suppose, of being vaccinated and protecting not only yourself, and I think that's a message that we often do, is protect yourself. That message doesn't work for Aboriginal people. When I was doing my focus groups, some of the younger people said, well, are you vaccinated? I said, yeah, I was fully vaccinated by April. Oh, what'd you do that? I said, well, for one, I work in health, but for two, I have a type 1 diabetic child and I would never want to bring an infection into my house at all. And they went, I do it for my family. So all of a sudden, if you change your message, what is your motivation? Who do you want to protect? Why do you want to protect that? So protect family, protect community, protect our elders. Those things are how we will be able to address. And I think the other thing we often talk about is participation in health. And we're very good at informing you. Information is not participation. We inform, we consult, we partner, we engage, we empower. There's a whole spectrum to participation. When you're just informing someone, the right to be involved in the decision making of something that affects you, that's what participation is about. And so I think to be told what to do and how to do it is information only. And so we need to progress a lot further to partner through health and through community.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is a great lead up to our next question, which is pretty big, and it's from a Year 12 student, Isabella Danaher. She asks, so what do you believe is the best way to close the inequitable gap in healthcare for Indigenous Australians in Australia?
So this is just the world according to Paula. I don't speak on behalf of every Aboriginal person, but again, it's in that participation. So I really, really believe that when we move into a health-related field, we need to partner with community. And so that is that spectrum that we have to move through. It takes time, it takes commitment, and it takes the ability to go, okay, I have to change what I intended to do. So when I did my initial survey around vaccine hesitancy on the Gold Coast, had over 2,500 respondents. Then I went into focus groups. I had these hypotheses of what I expected to hear. And of course, sometimes I was right, but sometimes I was wrong, and you have to go, okay, it's just like a science experiment, you know, but, well, that sounds really bad. I was not experimenting on people at all, okay? I was looking at ways. So we identify ways, and I had to go, oh, this course of action won't change behaviour at all. And behaviour change is a whole science in itself, okay? It's fascinating, and I really encourage you to go in there. No, but it's those things that if you have to be committed. For Aboriginal people, we have 5 core things for all of us, regardless of our 250 different languages and countries. Country is the essence to who we are, but then out of there comes these 4 pillars, and one of them is relationship. You don't build relationship by giving someone a pamphlet. You don't build relationship by putting an ad on the TV. You don't build relationship unless you invest in relationship. And that's what I talk about. Partnership, for me, is about relationship. Getting to know the individual. Getting to know the family. Getting to know the community. That is the way that I see the gap will be closed. It's not about making decisions from an office in Canberra or on the Gold Coast or anywhere like that. It's about actually investing time to see relationship, to hear from the person that is going to be affected by the decision, and then working that decision to empower the best outcome.
Yeah, absolutely. And how do you think students would be able to gain those relationships?
So sometimes it's putting yourself out there, and it's not always comfortable. And yes, I'm sure there will be older people that tell you, oh, you're too young to worry about that. But working with elders over the last, I won't tell you how many years, but the last while, I love hearing stories. I think storytelling is one of the most powerful narratives because we can all draw conclusions from something similar, shared experience, shared heritage, shared a whole range of things. Things that I've been told by elders, their family have said, Mum's never told me that, or Uncle never told me that. And these elders told me when there's someone willing to listen and to use that information right, we're happy to talk. So it takes time, and I think sometimes we rush these things, and it's about putting yourself out there, because it's maybe uncomfortable, but Friday afternoons during school terms, you have an Aboriginal choir rehearse right here in this space. And there's Aboriginal families from the Gold Coast that come here, and I'm sure if you approach the choir master and said, hey, is there something I could do, or could I come and listen, and have just listen, that you could experience culture and see culture from a different perspective right in your own very space. And sometimes we overlook that, and I hear often, I don't know there's any Aboriginal people or Aboriginal culture on the Gold Coast. I'm like, okay, whatever, but I practice my culture. I grow my food. I grow Australian native plants to eat. I teach that. I worked in the Botanic Gardens. We have a 63-metre garden called the Story of Our Country Garden, which is a journey from the desert to Southport. 63 kilometres, much easier to walk 63 metres. So you can learn so much. We have a Bora ground, a sacred site on the corner of the Gold Coast Highway and 6th Avenue. How many people drive past that every day but say there's no culture? And so I think sometimes it's because we have these lenses that how we've grown up and we see things through a certain lens. And I remember as a child I thought everyone was the same as me. And that's okay. It's quite nice to feel connected and belonging. Or that sense of belonging. But we quite quickly move to differentiate the difference. And that's where we can judge difference. And I think that's where it gets difficult. Whereas if you remove the lens and go, okay, I'm here, open-hearted, just want to listen and learn, then that's how the reciprocal will be met.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure stepping up and taking initiative to gain that connection is something that we all can do here. Let's move on to the next question, and this one is from a Year 10 student, Ria Gard. She said, I recently moved to Australia, and even though I have never faced blatant prejudice and discrimination at this school, I still feel that people have a negative bias towards me and treat me differently. I just want to know what goes on in the minds of people who hold this subtle bias towards me. So the main problem with casual racism is that it can have negative impacts on others, even if it wasn't motivated by malicious intent. Mrs. Hart, why don't you start with this one? What do you think other measures we should take to counteract casual racism? And more importantly, what can we do to check ourselves and our own actions?
I mean, I think I might have touched on that earlier, but that sort of, look, an unconscious bias is just that, it's unconscious. You don't actually know that it's occurring. And the best way to understand that it may be occurring is for someone else to highlight it to you. Because if it is genuinely unconscious, and again, like I said, from learnings that we have from a multitude of places, it doesn't come from a place of I'm a bad person. It comes from a learning that we've had at some point in our lives. And that doesn't make us any less of a wonderful human who has nothing but kindness for others. It is just something that is unconsciously occurring. And so we honestly don't know. That's the idea of it being an unconscious bias. The only way for us to understand is for someone else to let us know that that may or may not be occurring. And that is where we challenge each other. We are a community at this school, and we talk all the time about treating others with respect, valuing everyone, hearing everyone's opinion, hearing what their life is and their stories that they have to tell. And then from there, belonging to that community and being willing to opt in and do all of those things with everyone who's around us. This school is a perfect example of a multicultural society. But there will always be an unconscious bias that occurs because of learning. And I don't think that we're ever going to remove it. But if we are open to, when we hear something, say, look, can we talk about what just happened and what you said there? I'm not sure that's okay. And actually the person being open to learn, and open to learn is really hard, right? Because we get down this path and we go, I know all the answers. I do it all the time. I do it all the time with my toddler. No, I know the answer. I don't know the answer. But being open and willing to learn is how we can move forward. So we're challenging each other in this environment, and when we've learned that here, it's a big, brave step to challenging it in other places. But it starts here with us right now. For some of you, here's some of the things that you're going to learn today. And we take one thing and we take it forward. And when we're willing to do that, change occurs.
Yeah, that's right. And sometimes stepping up can be quite a challenge and it can be quite confronting. So Dinesh, do you have any ideas about checking yourself?
Yeah. There are a couple of different points about this. I was recently at a meeting with some of my medical colleagues, and we're talking about a few different patient issues. And a friend and a colleague just made the point that, oh, yeah, well, if the patient can't walk anymore, they might not feel like their life's worthwhile, or whatever else. And then I wasn't offended. I didn't even think of it. I said, well, I can't walk and I think my life's worthwhile. And so later she sent me a text message, said, oh my God, I can't believe I'm so thoughtless. And I just said that. I didn't really think it through. And I said, no, I didn't really consider it offensive at all, but I was just thinking about the patient because, you know. But it was interesting because she said that she's gay, and she said it's really hurtful when people use gay as a derogatory term, so I imagine that's how you might have felt, which is why I apologized. So I think sometimes people can just say things without thinking about it, and they may not mean any offense. I think it's okay to just say, oh, I actually found that offensive. But there's a portion of the population that probably don't feel any malice in what they're saying, but they're probably just ignorant about it. And then there is probably a group of people that are malicious about what they're saying. And I think it's up to all of us to hold them accountable for what they're doing. Because if we come together as a society and say that, this is what we believe in, and we all know what we're about in this country, right? Where I grew up in a place where it was really hard for people of different ethnicities and political beliefs to get together. They were killing each other. So this is a country where that's not really tolerated. But it's up to us to really stand up and say, and it's up to us to call it out if we see it happening. How often do we see those videos of someone carrying out a racist attack on public transport somewhere else? We need to call people out on that and let them know that it's not acceptable. But it starts on the grassroots because there are so many laws, there are criminal codes and whatever else. But a lot of the time those things are very hard to enforce in situations like these. But if we come together as a society and if we call it out, then I think there's a lot of power in that.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you said it starts from the grassroots, I think education is also a big part of it. Teaching young people what is right and what isn't. We'll move on to our next question. This was from an anonymous asker. They said this year saw the national census being filled out and it is still failing to accurately collect data on sexual orientation and gender diversity. A report by Amnesty International states that the census's lack of appropriate questions capturing the LGBTIQ+ communities and experiences will result in a service gap that constitutes discrimination of the LGBTIQ+ community. It's been almost 4 years since same-sex marriage was legalized in Australia. Do you think that the law will change Australian society as a whole? And do you believe that sparing government action is the most effective and immediate way to change people's perception of a community, or does something else need to be done? So Paula, you touched on media perception before. I'll have you start with this.
So I think, again, it comes down to looking at what our public participation is and how we engage to be able to do that well. The media does sell a story, it doesn't tell a story, it's not the truth. TV land is just TV land, it's not real. I think sometimes we lose sight of that and things can look in a certain way, and I really think that with smaller percentage groups in the community, it's easy to get lost because how do you get your voice heard? And I think some of the answers earlier about dealing with unconscious bias. It's starting with yourself and allowing yourself to be vulnerable. I'm an electrician by trade, and I used to have an apprentice that would work with me, and every time I went to a door, whoever answered the door would go to the male apprentice and explain the whole drama and whatever their electrical problem was, and I'd just stand there. And then the apprentice would go, "Oh, she's the boss, you might need to tell her." They'd go, "What?" Like, you know, yeah, I'm the boss, so what's your problem? You know, so there was things that people did, they just did not expect that a woman or a female would be an electrician and therefore would actually have an apprentice, you know, lo and behold. So some of these things, it wasn't like anyone was trying to be mean to me at all. I didn't feel that. I got used to it. It was just what would happen. You're like, okay, it'll get passed over to you in a minute. So sometimes it's trying to go, well, okay, if I can be vulnerable to go, well, what was it that you needed and how do we look at the pathway to do that? And sometimes by not saying something, then things just go and go and go. And I think laws are set at the very end, you know, when we have nothing else, because when I talked of the science of behaviour change, if we want to reduce speed and we want to reduce car accidents in risk-taking young males, I'm sorry, but that's what the evidence suggests, then there's a whole range of things we can do, but putting a speed limit and then fining you is like the last thing we can do. We want to do all the things before. Why do you want to speed? Why do you want to put others at risk and those sorts of things? And then explore those things and then go, okay, in behavioural science, where are we going? So I think for communities, our laws are the end result. We've got a whole lot of work to do in here, because if we did all of this, and smashed a microphone, we wouldn't need the law because we'd be working together.
That's right. This is hard. What do you think about laws and government action in your society?
Yeah, look, as I'm sure you want a proud member of the LGBT plus community. Thank you. That's exactly what I was looking for. I am married to my wife, and we did that in 2019 after the marriage equality law was changed. But Paul was right that came right at the end of an awful lot of work that happened beforehand. And the law may not have actually been required if certain systemic changes hadn't happened previously, because it was only once something was changed, to say that marriages between one man and one woman, that those things changed. And so, yes, laws and governance and all those things are incredibly important in our society, and laws do protect everyone, and that's why law has been passed. But the work that can be done before that is far more significant than the governance that occurs after the work's been done. The census, you're right that whoever asked that question is very astute, that the census did not accurately collect any data about the LGBT plus community. It allowed, I filled out the census, as is the law, and it stated that I was allowed to pick the most appropriate gender that applied to me, and so I did that. And then when we were talking about our family, the most appropriate term that I could choose for our daughter was father. So I'm currently listed as in a government database somewhere, Australian Bureau of Statistics, as our toddler's father. That you get to a point where you go, okay, and that's very similar to what you were saying. Okay, when the person comes to the door and starts talking to the male apprentice electrician, okay, that's fine. But there's an awful lot of systemic change that can occur from, and Dr. Palmoni is correct, from the grassroots. It comes from every single person here, because if we don't, then nothing changes. In fact, by not doing the grassroots work, the governance doesn't occur. And that seems like a really backward logic, but that is unfortunately what happens. So again, if I can encourage everyone to be the change that you actually expect to see, because the more of us in society that act upon that change at grassroots, the more likely it is that the governance will occur to then protect everyone in that society. Okay, and language, you were saying about your colleague who is gay, and here's the word gay used in a derogatory term. Language is so important, and that language, and it's probably the one thing, if you ever if I ever hear it here, it's any school I've ever worked in, and it is due to my personal experience and it is due to my lived experience. But if I hear someone go, oh, it's so gay, that is the one thing I would jump on. I could probably hear bad language, particularly in other schools I don't hear it here, but you know, you'd hear the language and ignore it, but it's that one thing, and I go, stop, come here, and we'd have a really big chat about it. And by the time the chat had finished, they'd go, sorry miss, I won't do it again. And I'd say, why? And they'd explain to me why. Sometimes, sorry miss, I won't do it again. Why? Because you told me not to do it. Fine. But it's those things that we can do to really help each other actually starts with you. And it seems really corny, but I wanted to say it, I'm going to anyway. You are the future of what's going to happen. You'll still be here when we're gone. Okay, so what is it that you can do in your lives to move everything forward? And language is incredibly important to bring about systemic change.
I'm immortal, I'll still be here.
Thank you, Hi. We'll move on to our next question, which is quite a big question, and something that Dinesh touched on before. So considering how discrimination is so persistent and pervasive in our times, Mr. Brett Hillman asked, how do we hold people accountable, and how do we know when to hold people accountable? Dinesh, I'll start with that one.
I think if you see something wrong, you just got to hold people accountable, like every time. You know, there's that famous saying which says that for evil to triumph, all that needs to happen is for good people to do nothing. So you have to stick up. You know, we talked about how it came up before that you might think, how can I make my voice be heard? Well, actually the reality is most people are too afraid to make their voice heard. They're afraid of the professional consequences. You might think, well, I'm still a high school student. For various reasons, we choose not to make our voice heard. But you have to be fearless, and you've got to be courageous. And like we said, you are the future. And there are lots of people from all different backgrounds, like Greta Thunberg, just making their voice heard across the world for something they believe in. And holding people accountable for it. Like, she had a great exchange with Donald Trump about climate change on Twitter and whatever else. But that's, you know, we need that. So hold people accountable anytime you see that something's wrong, something's unjust. There's a reason why I was able to get a job as a doctor. You know why that is? It's because enough people thought that it was unjust for someone with a disability not to be employed as a doctor. There were people that wrote letters, there were people that spoke on TV about it, there were people that stepped in to do all sorts of stuff. You know, there are doctors at our hospital that offered to give up their salary for me. So, this year I came across a talk by an emergency physician by the name of Cliff Reed, who talks about heroes. And I think that pretty much exemplifies the right answer to this question. And I think we just need to be heroes, because he defines heroes as people who have a very strong moral compass, that will do something for others without any expectation of personal gain, weathering fear and risk while taking responsibility for their actions. And that's how you hold people accountable.
Thank you. I'm sure we can all be heroes as well. And now just on to our next question. This was from an anonymous asker. They said, how do you help people understand the importance of inclusion in our communities when they don't personally understand the hardships the marginalized go through? And this is quite like something that Paula touched on with participation and connection. So Paula, what can we do better to understand other communities and their hardships to help foster a greater sense of inclusion?
So I think it's important to listen to the stories that people tell. When you're younger, it's all about listening. You get more experience as you get older and more opportunities open, and each experience brings a different opportunity. I was fortunate enough to work in Papua New Guinea as an electrician, and I remember thinking, because I'm Aboriginal, that the culture will be same, it's not. There was lots that I had to learn, but you have to be vulnerable to learn and to listen, and because I could do a range of amazing things, in one village, the elder in charge gave me the responsibility of getting lunch for everyone. And I remember when I was told that it was my job to get the whole village lunch, I'm like, what? What a waste of my time. Like inside I was like, oh, I've got far better things I could be doing with my time. And a group of young girls was to assist me. And so whilst I was walking to the market with them, I was like, suck it up, Paula. And I said to them, so what would you like to do with your life? Like, you're young girls here in this village, and what do you want to do? Anything that you could do, what is it? And one of them said to me, to have the honour of getting the village lunch would mean the most to her. And I thought, oh, I'm a wicked person. Like, because here I was judging this task that I thought I'd been given, and not looking at what it meant to those in the community. And I think it's easy to do that, to have our own perspectives and our own learnings, and it may be an unconscious bias, or it may be just that I was wicked that day, I don't know, but it was like, I had to really humble myself and say, I'm going to give everything I have into this lunch. It's going to be the best darn lunch they've ever had, like I tell you. And the girls and I worked hard to make this lunch for the village. And I think it's sometimes we carry these things with us and forget what it is from someone else's eyes. And when I went to leave that village, the men would carry water for me to have a shower to a shower house. And I found a pump, and there was an elder standing. And I said, oh, Uncle, would you like me to hook the pump up so you can pump water to the shower house? And he said, why would I want to do that? I said, well, it saves the men carrying the water. He says, you're going, you're the only person that has a shower. Like, I'm like, no, other people wash. And he said, come here. I said, see this? And he pointed, there's the creek line that goes through. He said, that's my shower house. Do you know what the best thing in my day is? I said, no, Uncle, what's the best thing in your day? When I walk to my shower house and I sit in that water and the birds sing to me their song, stop being touched by man. This is a gift for me. What do you want to do with that pump? I said, I'll leave it in the shed for you, no worries. So sometimes just because I can do something, just because I do know something, is it right to do? No, especially if to someone else. So it's about having that ability to reflect and then go, okay, my needs versus your needs versus your needs. Who is this about? Everything's not about Paula. I know you all think it should be. No, but it's not. It's not about Paula. And that's what I constantly remind my children. No, you are not the boss. Everything's not about you, okay? It's about all of us. And that's where I think inclusion is. By listening, understanding, and building on those knowledges, and then acting with the best intention for others, knowing their story and working with them.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. That's all we have time today. And I think what we've definitely all learned from this session is that the power lies within all of us, that it can start with us right now, that all it takes is just to step up and have courage, to speak up, to gain connections with others. And that's all we need to do to be the change. So thank you very much to Dinesh, Mrs. Hart, and Paul for coming in today. We give them a big round of applause.